This video has a lot of spoilers, be warned.
These are dark times, where the law has been reduced to rubble, and it's up to us to restore it to its former glory. Hi, I'm KempDog, and today, instead of doing one of the big ranking videos you've seen on this channel up to this point, I'm going to do something a little different and do a dedicated video breaking down one very specific plotline in the Ace Attorney universe. One that has become slightly notorious among certain people in the fanbase, and that is, of course, the Dark Age of the Law, an arc that mainly stretches over the course of Dual Destinies. This is one of the most commonly criticized aspects of Dual Destinies in general. Heck, even we've made passing jokes about this plot beat a tiny bit ourselves in our big ranking of all the Ace Attorney cases. And the thing about this plotline is that it really isn't something you can just ignore while playing it. It gets brought up a lot. A lot. There's an entire character in Dual Destinies who won't shut up about how the times have changed and how the ends justify the means. One could say it's just a bit heavy-handed. The thing is, though, I've seen far too many people get the totally wrong idea about what this story is really about. And I don't think most of the criticisms people levy at it really hold up. They seem to be based on a total misunderstanding of what the game was actually trying to do. So that's why I've come here to hopefully clear everything up. It may take a while to explain, and a few of my opinions on this plotline are based on a bit of a personal theory than something outright mentioned in the text of the game, but I believe this arc was way better thought out than most people give it credit for, and we're going to get to the bottom of all this. Time to bring this Dark Age to an end. So, first order of business. So essentially, what this comes down to is this. The legal system in the Ace Attorney world was so full of corruption that the general public got sick of it, leaving Phoenix Wright and Simon Blackquill to pick up the pieces of what had long since been shattered. And given how much publicity this whole Dark Age ended up getting, it stands to reason that this would be directly affecting a few different characters. Now we got teachers talking about how cool it is to forge evidence for the sake of winning, and we got Apollo Justice deciding, I want to be edgy, and putting on an eye patch and a cool jacket and stuff, just like that. Because times are different, man. Definitely no other reason for that. And right from the moment Dual Destiny starts, one of the first things we see is Phoenix Wright making his grand return to the courtroom. At first, we, the audience, are like, oh right, Phoenix is back! And then we're like, wait, Phoenix is back? One game ago, we saw him in a hoodie and refusing to shave. A 7-year time skip had changed his character to this hobo in the background who carefully plans out all of his moves and is one of the best poker players around. Barely even recognizable as the same guy we knew in the first 3 games. And now suddenly, like magic, here he is again with the iconic blue suit and red tie, coming to save the day for his new legal partner who's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It's like the last game never even happened. Nobody's here to address it. What's up with that? Did we just experience another time skip to switch him back that's about to be filled in and explained by most of the other cases in the game that takes place before it? Nah, couldn't be. And of course, once again, there's the whole specter of the Dark Age of the Law being all over the place right from the start. There's even merchandise of the Dark Age of the Law being sold. There's stuffed animals called the Phony Fanty and the Bum Rap Rhiney. It's a big deal that everyone knows about. Though now that we think about it, why is that happening now of all times? Oh, detectives are incompetent? Prosecutors are corrupt? One already got accused of murder and just happens to be allowed to serve behind the bench while serving his sentence? That's crazy! No prosecutor has ever been convicted for murder in the series before. Oh wait. Anyway, that's the general perception people seem to have of the Dark Age of the Law. It's this big plot device that gets shoved down your throat a lot. It results in a bunch of characters acting weird, and the fact that Case 1 of Dual Destinies canonically happens in the middle of Case 4 only serves to further make everything that much more confusing. Real talk, I really don't know why they put Case 1 in the middle of Case 4. I feel like the writers choosing to do that is a big part of how all these misunderstandings came to be. But what if I told you there are deeper explanations to all the weird stuff going on, that they actually connect together way more than you'd think? Well, we have a bit of explaining to do. There are only a few character arcs that fit together what the Dark Age of the Law covers. It's very simple. It only involves Phoenix Wright, Apollo Justice, Kristoph, Gavin, Simon Blackquill, the Phantom, every other killer of Dual Destinies, not counting Marlon Rhymes, because with an accident, and probably also Roger Retinz. Oh, and the Public Opinion, and maybe Gasping Pain. Simple, right? But okay, if that sounds intimidating, we'll start from the ground up. And it first needs to be said that the real roots of the Dark Age aren't in Dual Destinies. It all began in Apollo Justice. I cannot even begin to tell you just how many people say Dual Destinies just does its own thing without continuing from Apollo Justice. But it isn't just continuing. Apollo Justice is quite literally integral to every event that occurs in Dual Destinies. And what was so important to occur there? Simple. Phoenix and Kristoph Gavin, the two people that never should have fought, not only fought, but went full scorched earth, all out war on each other. So why should they never have fought? Well, first of all, the legal system was in a bit of a precarious place when they did. The most proficient prosecutor probably in the nation was found out to be not only a forging lunatic, but also murdered someone over his perfect record. Not even a loss, but over a penalty. The chief prosecutor was blackmailed by the chief of police and used officers and prosecutors alike as sacrificial pawns to further their political gain. Not to mention, a famous private investigator was found out to be a blackmailer. Someone posed as an attorney with a cardboard badge to get the verdict they wanted, and more. All of these cases are large hits on the legal system and law enforcement, and well publicized ones too. What do all of these have in common? Of course, they were all solved by Phoenix Wright, an attorney who always strived to serve the people specifically, who had no tolerance for forging or corruption, and made a name for himself by catching the craziest of plots, no matter how ludicrously complex they seemed. That's what Phoenix had to his name, though there's also Kristoph as well. He stood on the board of the Bar Association, one of the only aspects of the legal system that had not fallen under serious corruption scandals. This board approves new attorneys to get attorney badges, and if they get to keep it. Already, you can see how this might set the stage for such a dark age to get off the ground. Nearly every aspect of the legal system would have had some kind of major corruption scandal that would have shaken people's faith in it if they'd been paying attention. Now, just the fact that Phoenix and Kristoph fought with each other in itself didn't necessarily make everything fall apart, but it's the way they did it, again, in such an easily publicized way, where both of them ended up completely humiliated. First, Kristoph made the first move with the forged diary page. That one page destroyed Phoenix. And in a way that made him not only lose the case in humiliating fashion, but it made him lose his entire credibility with the people. He became just as corrupt as what he fought. And worse, to prove a point, on his return to the courtroom as a defendant, he decided to actually forge evidence. Although that wasn't presented to actually indict Kristoph, rather to bait him into admitting the real deal existed under oath. And as far as we know, the fact that Phoenix forged the bloody Ace of Spades was never made public, but it served to emotionally ruin the guy baited into presenting it himself, Apollo Justice. And put a pin in him, we'll get to him later. But as we know, just getting Kristoph behind bars wasn't enough. Phoenix then made the move to utterly humiliate him as well by exposing every single crime the man committed for all the world to see. He'd spent 7 years uncovering the deep plots that Kristoph had set into motion. His spying, his actively ruining lives with no regard, and even more murder. All coming from someone within the one previously untainted faction of the legal system. A complete abuse of power for the entire world to see, thanks to his trial also being the test case for a new juris system, which definitely didn't end up being slightly abused in its own right for the sake of Phoenix's revenge, leading to said system never becoming more widely implemented or even mentioned again later in the series. But again, just as Phoenix's disbarment happened in such a widely publicized manner, Kristoph's undoing was even more widely spread. Everyone was watching, not just the regular people, but the future killers as well. And just like that, there was no longer any faction in the legal system that people could honestly put their faith in. This is the point where the Dark Age of the Law truly began. So this finally brings us to the beginning of Dual Destinies. 4-4 has completely shaken the Phoenix Wright world. The news media has turned against the courts and law enforcement sowing mistrust across the board. And in turn, killers noticed that the police were now incredibly ill-prepared to deal with the most cockamamie plots for murder. Phoenix Wright may have been a famous attorney, but he was the only one who delved so far into these plots. And it took him nearly a decade to expose Kristoph Gavin with no resources. Now, people got an idea of how far they could take their plots with little resistance. All of the killers in Dual Destinies may be corrupt in completely different ways, but all of them have plots that take advantage of the lack of legal minds able to see through the insane plots they came up with, and each can have you lose total faith in the system as they succeed. You can get a cartoonish bomb disposal specialist cop who doubles as a black market agent, visibly pinning his crimes on some random little girl who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and everyone around is too desensitized to this kind of thing for it to end up being a big deal. Completely unlike real life, right? Where we definitely see police regularly face actual consequences for their actions and not just get away with most blatant crap all the time, right? You do also get Florent LaBelle, who, well, okay. His plan is not exactly the kind of thing you see every day. Just, that plan is insane, period. But he did try to remove multiple districts of power at once to get his hands on some gold, so that's still a systemic attack as well. However, for the moment you have likely been dreading. The most important killer, aside from the Phantom, is Professor Means. We're all choking from his words getting shoved down our throat, but to deny his impact is an honest injustice. I think this guy is actually really well written and a crucial part of what makes this arc work so well. The thing is, he is the embodiment of everything Phoenix feared would occur. His embrace of the dark times that Phoenix warned would come in Apollo Justice. He teaches kids to forge evidence, lie, threaten, steal in the open, and he just smiles proudly and brags non-stop about the effectiveness of his methods. He can openly talk about these things, and even talks about how he dreams someone will stand as extremely as him. Even children are a means to an end to take blame for him. And the absolute instant that his alibi is let go in 5-3, Blackquill stops trying to prosecute Junie, knowing there is only one logical conclusion, even in a 50-50 chance between the two people with no alibis. Even though Professor Means was arrested, it would not be surprising if lawyers he taught and prosecutors and judges he inspired made their way on the benches. Even if you ultimately break free Junie, Robin, Hugh, and partially Miriam of his methods, the damage is already being done. Heck, I honestly think it's a bit of a missed opportunity that Phoenix didn't face off against Means himself. Not that I'd ever want Athena deprived of her one major case as the lead attorney, but Means is a symptom of the epidemic that Phoenix and Kristoph started with each other. Not only do Means and Kristoph share the same attitude of people being expendable and aiming to bring lots of people down with their actions, Means is also kind of a consequence of Phoenix's actions as well. It's not like Phoenix didn't contribute to the corruption himself a little bit, and he would directly have to face that himself. Even though we didn't get a good look into Phoenix's mind during 5-3, I bet you anything that during that case, he was having some flashbacks to that diary page while it was going down. Every bit of forged evidence, every new student learning about the ends justifying the means, all of it makes more and more opportunities for more 4-4 type cases to happen. For more people's lives to get ruined, just like what happened to Phoenix and Zack. I won't argue there could have been a way to make Professor Means less heavy-handed. Toning down the sheer repetitiveness of his mantra would have helped a lot. but his methods were absolutely necessary to show how flagrant things had become. All of these isolated incidents highlight how wholly ill-equipped the system was for them, and it all formed an environment where corruption was the norm. Killers like these would feel empowered to do whatever they want. Attorneys, both defense and prosecuting, now knew they could actively escape using forged evidence with little to no accountability. And in the middle of all of this, Apollo Justice was found helpless. After the events of the game he's named after, Apollo Justice has the distinct honor of having worked under an attorney who he had just helped expose for being completely evil and corrupt, followed by working under an attorney famous for being ridiculous and out there. If he'd been looking to start work for a law agency with an actual good reputation, yeah, good luck getting somewhere with that resume. And it's pretty heavily implied that Apollo, understandably, isn't all too happy with his current situation. And even if he's hesitant to come out and say it for a while, it's clear he holds some active resentment towards Phoenix. And he has every reason to, since Phoenix hasn't exactly been treating him with much respect. While Apollo was first getting started at his law office, Phoenix never tried to train him at all or teach him anything. He only ever used him as a convenience that babysits his daughter. And it is unclear how Apollo even makes money up until Spirit of Justice, because it seems Apollo had to come up with his own fee system, free of payment from Phoenix. He is still getting called into the office just to be Trucy's babysitter and having to spend his own money on her in 5-2, which would be fine if they knew they were related. But the fact that Phoenix only gives Apollo the basic advice of always believing in your client that he learned from Mia only once we have gotten to 5-2 is just so freaking telling how little he is bothered with Apollo. And on top of that, there's also the obvious fact that Phoenix never keeps Apollo in the loop on anything. Even basic things like whatever Phoenix's current plans are or whatever he's doing at a given moment are treated as either a secret or not important enough to pass along to Apollo aside from maybe a cryptic hint. Even something like Phoenix getting his badge back, which you'd think would be really important to mention to Apollo, but just one day he had a suit on, which Apollo is very thrown off by, and then another day he has a badge, which Apollo is also completely taken aback by. The look on Apollo's face the second it connects in his head that Phoenix has a badge and has actually gone through with becoming a lawyer again isn't one of admiration, it's one of bewildered shock, maybe even fear or anger, even if he may try to suppress it with a smile immediately after. This is the true base of Phoenix and Apollo's arc together in Dual Destinies. Phoenix just cannot bother to inform Apollo about anything. Not about his job, not about his past or family, not about the fact that Phoenix will be going out of his way to learn how to reconcile with the events of 4-4 to become a better person. Phoenix just completely takes him for granted, and it leads to Apollo getting more and more resentful of Phoenix. He just doesn't trust his boss to not use him as a pawn again and again. Not that he has any reason to believe he won't. He spends all of 5-6 with his main assignment being, and I kid you not, watering the office plant and confirming if a pill that says 3 Z's is a sleeping pill. You know, helpful assignments. Apollo even implies that at one point he wanted to quit altogether but was stopped by his good childhood friend Clay Tarrant, who wanted him to hold out hope they could make his initial dream a reality. But that's only the build-up for what would lead Apollo to eventually take his leave of absence. The straw that really broke the camel's back happened off-screen just before the first trial of 5-4, when Apollo and Athena were investigating the Space Center after Clay Tarrant's murder. Already, the fact that his best childhood friend was just killed is an intensely emotional experience for him. Enough so where Apollo keeps carrying Clay's jacket around as a keepsake to keep him focused on the truth. But it only gets much worse when his bracelet won't stop reacting to Athena along the way, which is where the eye patch comes in. He put it on not because of any injury, but because that would stop him from reflexively focusing on the nervous tick of the person he trusted, or thought he could trust. Otherwise, he would start to go a little mad. There was never any intent of edginess through his new appearance. They directly provided him with a way to cope with all the inner conflict he was going through. But once Apollo had come to terms with the possibility Athena might actually be a suspect, he knew there was no way Phoenix would accept that. And quite frankly, he truly believed that Phoenix would cross any line to save her without listening to him, just as he did to catch Kristoph. And it was at that moment Apollo decided to use Phoenix's own patented contingency method to counter any idea he could cook up, throwing his Apollo Justice methods right back in his face. He absolutely refused to let blind faith, even in his trusted coworker, get in the way of finding out the true events that befell his childhood friend, and wasn't about to let Phoenix get away with any more underhanded methods. So of course, all Phoenix had to do to completely undermine all of that was do a classic first trilogy bluff. Both Apollo and Edgeworth were prepared for the mastermind version of Phoenix to make his moves, but a guess like that broke them both. Apollo had never even seen Phoenix do such a massive bluff like that, and just sat aghast at it. It was something without any thought put behind it, but with just enough possibility where you can't rule it out, and once it became clear that Phoenix could actually be counted on to pull the real truth out, even if out of his ass, only then did Apollo realize that he really could trust Phoenix to do the right thing all along, eventually taking off the eye patch and the jacket much later, willing to face the whole truth with both of his eyes. It may take until the end of Spirit of Justice for their relationship to completely repair, and for Phoenix to realize that he can also put his trust in Apollo, especially throughout the even higher stakes of 6-5. But this is where the turnaround for their initial animosity finally starts. Although that obviously didn't start immediately after Phoenix first made the bluff. Apollo may not have seen Phoenix bluff like that before, but Edgeworth already knew this was the kind of shtick that Phoenix was known for pulling all the time, so while the stupidness of the guess still broke him in the moment, he was still able to easily counter him, mentioning, "Under no feasible circumstance would such an insane escape route work, and no one on the continent would dare try." So of course, Phoenix brings up the Phantom, and Edgeworth brain rots on contact, knowing that the possibility isn't just likely, but well within the scope of what such a next-level super spy can accomplish. In fact, that next-level super spy is crucially important to the Dark Age of the Law. The second biggest case in this arc fully revolves around him, so let's get into that next. Yeah, there was this whole other massive case going on this whole time, wasn't there? It's only the reason Phoenix was inspired to put his badge back on in the first place. So that brings us to Blackwill's case. A case ostensibly full of corruption, as Blackquill admits he is guilty of murdering his mentor to steal a precious moonrock. He is on camera, he's the only one at the scene at the time of the murder, a complete abuse of power to accomplish his goal. Well, except for the part where every bit of that sentence is completely wrong. Blackwill's case had nothing to do with his position at all. There was no abuse of power, he didn't actually forge anything, and it's not even a substantial case aside from taking place in a space center right around a rocket launch. What would a case like this have anything to do with the Dark Age of the Law to begin with? I guess it doesn't matter. We're just going off what we were directly told in the early parts of Dual Destinies. This trustworthy-looking detective is the one who told us how important the case was to the ongoing development of the Dark Age. And we definitely know, for sure, that he'd have no hidden agenda in doing so, right? I mean, just look at him. This guy obviously loves justice. Right? Yeah, that's kind of a problem, isn't it? Blackquill isn't actually that threatening to the public. He just looks threatening. Blackwill's allowed to prosecute again because his talents are so unique, they need him to use his psychological mastery to help weed through the elaborate murder plots becoming more widespread. And since he's in jail, he can't forge anything. You'd think just the fact that in spite of everything, he's still trustworthy enough to be allowed behind the bench in the first place would be a good sign. But instead, it's presented as, oh well, it's just a sign of the times of how crazy the legal system has gotten these days. But why go out of your way to present Blackquill that way? Well, Blackquill is also stating over and over again, he must find the one that actually sabotaged the Hat 1. And he may or may not have a single piece of evidence that makes him a genuine threat to this saboteur, the man he calls the Phantom. So you see, the Phantom has a mission as Dual Destinies plays out. He has to shake Simon Blackwill's credibility. Blackquill has evidence that can actually be a threat to his cover. He has the talents and the resources to hunt him, and now is allowed by the government to investigate him behind bars. You can notice the Phantom enacting the plot to derail Blackwill's credibility throughout the game, even though he may try to cover it up with a bit of talk about how he thinks Blackquill can be rehabilitated into society, or how his mastery of psychology makes him perfect for the job, even if he's coming out of prison. But Fulbright is always quick to ham up just how scary Blackquill is, and how he might try to kill you when given the opportunity as well. He goes out of his way to establish Blackquill as a genuine threat, right down to the specific way he's presented in court. Blackquill goes as far as to break out of his cuffs in every single case, but Fulbright doesn't actually do anything to address it despite being the one supposedly in charge of security to stop Blackquill before he gets violent. You'd think someone claiming to be making efforts to rehabilitate Blackwill's image would try to stop his violent tendencies, but he's never stopped from acting violently in court until the very last second, or until it's already too late. There has to be a big show made out of how violent Blackquill is before anything can be done about it. They never replace his cuffs, they just let him go off. It is all to make him lose his credibility. And as Blackquill fails, that means the Phantom can prevent him from using the evidence he has on him. To put it all bluntly, Blackquill actually has no role in the Dark Age aside from what he does in court as a prisoner. And he is actually anti-corruption. But what he does provide is he provides Phoenix a way to restore his personal credibility by letting Blackquill take some of the blame for something never his fault in the first place. Right after Blackquill gets his cuffs taken off for the last time, both of them basically give public statements on how they helped usher in the Dark Age in what is essentially a press conference mid-trial where both apologize for how their actions derailed the court system. Phoenix talks about taking responsibility for things falling apart with his evidence forging scandal and how he will properly dispel it by catching the Phantom, which is fine by itself, but it comes with a much less needed apology from Blackquill. His statement was how he helped usher in the Dark Age by letting the Phantom escape through his covering for Athena. And I'm like, okay, no. He just escaped because there was no way Blackquill or anyone else could have known the Phantom was even there. Heck, his previous assumption that Athena was the culprit was proof there was no trace remaining. His trial was legit even if the investigation was rushed. The evidence absolutely pointed in his direction. No fast ones were pulled, and he even pleaded guilty. But Phoenix didn't really try to correct Blackwill's statement, and this allowed Blackquill to carry the blame of the Dark Age, even if it is not his weight to carry at all. By dispelling the suspicion and the sentence of Blackquill, Phoenix absolves himself, even if he quite frankly should still be considered an absolute outlier attorney for the events of Apollo Justice. Though, as a side note, that means that the one truly corrupt prosecutor in the Dark Age that the games show us is fucking Gaspin Payne, for he is evil beyond compare. Though there is one last point to bring up. How did this get so widespread across the news in the first place when so many aspects of these events were covered up? Well, I think we need to talk about this man called Roger Retinz. Okay, at this point we're operating entirely within my personal theories and not talking about things directly supported by the text of the game. But there are a lot of implications that this all happened, and it would honestly make so many different things throughout the entire second trilogy make more sense. Roger Retinz, aka Mr. Reus, was of course the secret extra disciple of Magnifi Grammari, who was ousted from the troupe over a single mistake he made. First hinted at when Valant is questioned about the existence of another disciple in 4-4, and he gives a somewhat evasive answer that doesn't outright deny the possibility. But I don't think he's just a simple retcon that the Ace Attorney writers saw an opening for within Apollo Justice and built upon. I think there might be lots more traces of evidence that he had some direct influence on the way other parts of the second trilogy, including the Dark Age of the Law, played out. It might stick out to some as weird that it took so long for an incident like 6-2 to happen if Retinz really had so much long-running resentment for the Grammaris, but if you ask me, the fact that we only saw him make his move in Spirit of Justice is no coincidence. I think he was trying to enact his revenge against Magnifi and Troupe Grammari for his ousting the entire time. And there are two plots that I think he may have had ongoing in both the previous games that ended up foiled, resulting in his eventual trying to take out his revenge on Trucy in 6-2. Now, from the time gap that occurs after his ousting, it makes sense that he would have already been a TV and news personality by the time 4-4 happened. At first, Retinz would have had no reason to act with the Grammari name buried by their dysfunction, with Magnifi's suicide, Valant's tampering, and Zack vanishing into the ether. But as the final points were being set up for Phoenix to confront Kristoph and nationally embarrass him, a miracle began. Valant started to make a comeback as the secrets of his mentor would become his to perform. Now, you'd think that after Valant announced that he would be performing again and reviving the magic tricks of the widely beloved Troupe Grammari, he'd be met with a flood of fans and excitement for him to be able to perform to the fullest once more. But he got none of that. His announcement instead just woke up the media's curiosity if he was the one to kill Magnifi, despite Zack having run off and abandoned his daughter in the care of his attorney and clearly having acted more suspiciously by the end of his own trial. All the attention and ire was put on the guy actually trying to make the comeback, and the media presence was overwhelming to the point even Valant couldn't contain his stress and anger. I am of the belief that with Roger Retinz now being written, had Valant gone through with the act, he would have been nationally humiliated on live TV, just like how Retinz would eventually set up Trucy. But that plan was of course foiled by Phoenix Wright. See, Phoenix allowed Valant to escape with the proof of the genuine diary page, and showed him Trucy was now the true inheritor of Magnifi's art. Valant realized how exhausted his plan had made him, and it didn't even have the intended result. So he decided to give up the show entirely instead of going ahead with his idea for a grand finale. Valant decided to leave with his dignity intact and turned himself into the police for the deed even he didn't commit. That way he could look Zack in the eye if they ever met again. Thus, any attempt by the media to humiliate him would have immediately fallen flat. Retinz couldn't make his move. But that was just the first plan. The second would have happened in Dual Destinies, and it's even more suspicious than anything that happened in Apollo Justice. Once again, the media acts very unusually in Dual Destinies and really went into hysterics over Phoenix's return and Blackwill's return. They went all out against the courts, saying they were beyond corrupt and shaking society's faith in the system as a whole. That's obviously not completely unfounded, but the problem is the timing. This didn't happen when Phoenix was disbarred, and it didn't happen when Blackquill was convicted. It only starts to occur during Dual Destinies when Phoenix tries to make his return. By now, the war between Phoenix and Kristoph has already occurred and finished. And yet, somehow, right when Phoenix was gearing up to return to the courts, there was this huge media campaign that even spun off stuffed animals like the phony Fanty and the bum-wrapped Rennie. The media attention on corruption reached a comical level. None of this came out when Manfred von Karma was found out, or when Chief Gant was discovered, or any of the many abuses of power we see across the franchise, which were quite frankly all a much bigger deal than any of the corruption going on in Dual Destinies. And shortly after 5-5, all that talk of the Dark Age of the Law suddenly dissipates and we don't hear about it again afterwards. My guess is Roger Retinz helped create these media campaigns so that Phoenix would have a much harder time returning to the legal profession. Retinz can't target Zack, who's dead, Valiant, who's in prison, or Thalassa, who is missing / presumed dead, even though technically she's perfectly alive and well as Lamarar, but Retinz couldn't have possibly known that. So the only one directly involved in the events of 4-4 is their savior of sorts, Phoenix Wright. Clavier, who is integrally involved in 4-4, is completely spared any scrutiny during the Dark Age era, and he used more corrupt means than Phoenix in that trial. And that stands to reason. If Roger Retinz is behind the campaigns against the courts, why would Clavier be targeted when he actually tried to take down the Grimoires? Once the public was no longer feeding into how corrupt and messed up Phoenix presumably was with the arrest of the Phantom, it immediately ended. And this just so happens to fit perfectly into how Take-Two TV runs things. Only after the campaign dies and Phoenix leaves the country does Retinz make his most damaging plan yet, on someone completely uninvolved. But now the only person in his reach to target, Trucy. This is why 6-2 occurs. This is why it takes him so long to make his move. I strongly suspect he had already been trying for quite some time, ever since the Grimoires resurfaced in the public eye, and this was the only revenge he had left. If he can't hurt them directly, he will settle for indirectly by stripping them of their efforts to protect her. That's what the majority of the modern day Grimoire drama is about, protecting Trucy. And this is why 6-2 is such a fantastic addition to the franchise. It adds so much nuance to the prior two games with Roger Retinz existing somewhere in the background, and it ties perfectly into how the Dark Age of the Law plays out. Now, while a great deal of this context and interpretations is only possible with the full second trilogy context, that's the point. So much of the second trilogy improves drastically with the new context, and it fleshes things out much better. And it's why you shouldn't simply discard this aspect of Ace Attorney. I truly appreciate what has changed across the games, and it has only furthered my enjoyment of the second trilogy. And I hope my take and analysis of this helps you understand that, and I hope you appreciate and enjoy it more too. So that'll be everything. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. These projects are a lot of fun to make, and we have more coming in the future. The next big project will be regarding the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles and how those cases fit in our ranking. And my next project like this one is going to be about the true timeline of the events in 4-4. See you next time!